So my friends from America, Germany, and Australia just experienced something they said they'd never forget for the rest of their lives. And by the end of this video, one of them was literally in tears. Not because something bad happened, but because of something so unexpected, so overwhelming, that it completely shattered everything they thought they knew about how people treat strangers. Now, I need you to understand something. These aren't just any tourists. These are people who've traveled to over 30 countries combined. They've seen the world. They've experienced different cultures. But what happened over these 3 days in Malaysia left them absolutely speechless. And the crazy part. We didn't take them to any fancy hotels or expensive restaurants. What we showed them was something money actually can't buy. And before this video ends, you're going to see exactly what broke them down emotionally. But first, I need to tell you where this whole thing started, because that's where you'll understand why this matters so much. 3 months ago, I was in a group chat with some online friends I'd been gaming with for 2 years. We'd never met in person. There was Jake from Texas, Emma from Berlin, and Chris from Sydney. We were just talking about travel, and Emma mentioned how she felt like modern travel had become so transactional. You pay for a hotel, you pay for tours, you pay for food, but you never really connect with people anymore. Everything feels like a business transaction. That's when I made them an offer that would change everything. I told them, come to Malaysia. Don't book any hotels. Don't plan anything. Just trust me for 3 days, and I'll show you something different. Now, you have to understand how insane this sounded to them. These were people I'd never met face to face. And I was basically asking them to fly halfway across the world and put their entire trip in my hands. But here's what you don't know yet. I wasn't doing this alone. And the plan I had in mind was something that would test everything they thought they knew about strangers, trust, and what it means to be welcomed into someone's world. Because Malaysian hospitality isn't just about being nice. It's something deeper, something that's coded into our DNA as a culture, and most foreigners have no idea it even exists until they experience it. Jake was the first to message me privately. He said, "Bro, I'm not gonna lie, this sounds sketchy, but also like the most interesting thing I could do. I'm in." Then Emma and Chris followed. Within 2 weeks, they had all booked their flights. They were really doing this. They were flying to Malaysia with 0 hotel bookings, 0 plans, and just a promise from some guy they'd only known through a headset. But here's where it gets interesting. I didn't tell them the full plan. Because if I had, they might not have believed me. And what happened when they landed at Clear? That's when the real experiment began. The moment they walked out of the arrivals hall, I could see it on their faces. That mix of excitement and nervousness. They spotted me, and there was this awkward moment where we all realized, okay, this is real now. We did the introductions, some laughs, and then Jake asked the question I was waiting for. "So, where's the hotel?" I smiled and said, "We're not staying at a hotel. You're staying with my family." The looks on their faces. Emma actually stopped walking. She said, "Wait, what? Your family? They know about this?" And that's when I explained to them the first rule of Malaysian hospitality that foreigners never understand. When you invite someone, you're not just inviting them as a guest. You're inviting them as family. And in Malaysia, that word actually means something. We drove to my family home in Subang Jaya. Now, I need to paint this picture for you because it's important. This isn't some mansion. It's a regular double-story terrace house. My parents, my grandmother, my younger sister, all living in one space. And I had told my mom 3 weeks earlier that I was bringing 3 foreign friends home. You know what she said? She didn't ask if they were staying 1 night or 3. She didn't ask about dietary restrictions or preferences. She just said, "Okay, I'll prepare the rooms. Bring them home." That's it. No hesitation. No questions about who these people were or why I was bringing strangers into our home. Because in her mind, they weren't strangers. They were her son's friends, which automatically made them family. When we pulled up to the house, my mom was already at the door. And here's where it started getting emotional for them, but they didn't know it yet. My mom greeted each of them with both hands, looked them in the eyes, and said in her broken English, "Welcome home. You are family now?" Chris later told me that moment hit him differently. He said in Australia, even his close friends' parents would keep a polite distance. But here was a woman who'd never met him, treating him like she'd known him his whole life. But that was just the beginning. Because what my mom had prepared for them in that house was something that would change their entire perspective on what hospitality really means. And I'm going to tell you what it was. But first, you need to understand what happened in the first 30 minutes, because that set up everything else. My grandmother came downstairs. She's 78 years old, and she doesn't speak a word of English. But she took one look at Emma, held her face in her hands, and said something in Malay. I translated, she says you have a kind face and you're too skinny. She's going to make sure you eat well. Emma's eyes immediately got watery. She told me later that her own grandmother had passed away 2 years ago, and this was the first time since then that an elderly woman had shown her that kind of maternal affection. And my grandmother had known her for exactly 90 seconds. Then my sister showed them to their rooms. We had given them the 2 spare bedrooms upstairs, and my parents had spent the entire previous day cleaning, rearranging furniture, and making sure everything was perfect. There were fresh flowers on the nightstands. Clean towels folded on the beds. And here's the detail that made Jake pause. There were small welcome notes written in English on each bed. My mom had spent an hour writing these notes, and she'd used Google Translate to make sure the English was correct. Each note was personalized. Jake's said, "Welcome Jake. We are happy you are here. Please treat this as your home. If you need anything, just ask. You are safe here." That last line. "You are safe here." Jake stood there reading it twice. He told me later that he'd stayed in 5-star hotels that never made him feel as welcomed as that simple handwritten note did. But we hadn't even gotten to dinner yet. And what was waiting for them downstairs? That's when they started to realize this wasn't just a nice gesture. This was something completely different from anything they'd experienced before. When they came back downstairs, the dining table looked like we were hosting a wedding reception. I'm not exaggerating. My mom had spent the entire afternoon cooking. There was nasi lemak, rendang, sambal sotong, ayam persik, satay with peanut sauce, rojak, and she'd even made kui for dessert. The table was completely covered in food. Emma looked at me and whispered, "This is just for tonight. For the 6 of us." And I had to explain to her that in Malaysian culture, especially in my mom's generation, the amount of food you serve guests is directly tied to how much you honor them. It's not about waste. It's about abundance. It's about showing that you held nothing back. But here's what they didn't expect. My mom didn't just serve the food and leave. She sat down with us. My whole family did. And for the next 2 hours, we just ate and talked and laughed. My grandmother kept putting more food on Emma's plate, saying things in Malay that made everyone laugh even though Emma couldn't understand the words. Chris asked about the rendang, and my mom's face lit up. She spent 15 minutes explaining how she made it, what spices she used, why it had to cook for hours. And then she said something that I saw land differently with all three of them. She said, "I made this because I want you to taste Malaysia. Not restaurant Malaysia. Real Malaysia. The food we make for people we love." There was this moment of silence at the table. And Jake said, "I've eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants. But I don't think any chef has ever said they cooked for me because they loved me." My mom didn't fully understand his English, but she understood the emotion. She reached over and patted his hand and said, "Of course. You are family." After dinner, they insisted on helping clean up. My mom initially refused, saying they were guests. But Emma said something that made my mom stop. She said, "If we're family like you said, then let us help like family would." My mom looked at her, and then she smiled and handed her a dish towel. And for the next 30 minutes, my foreign friends were in a Malaysian kitchen, washing dishes with my grandmother, while my mom told stories about growing up in Penang. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Jake sent a message to our group chat. He said, "I don't know how to explain this, but I feel more at home here than I have anywhere in the past 5 years. And I met these people 8 hours ago." But that was just day 1. And what happened on day 2? That's when things went to a completely different level. Because we took them somewhere that revealed the true depth of Malaysian hospitality. And it's not what you think. The next morning, my mom made breakfast. Not a simple breakfast. She woke up at 6 a.m. to make roti canai from scratch because she wanted them to experience it fresh. When they came down and saw her in the kitchen, flour on her hands, flipping the roti in the air, Emma just shook her head in disbelief. "You didn't have to do this," Emma said. My mom replied, "I know. I wanted to." After breakfast, I told them we were going to walk around the neighborhood. Now, Malaysian suburbs aren't like Western suburbs. People actually interact here. Neighbors know each other. There's a community feeling that's hard to explain if you haven't experienced it. We walked past Uncle Rahman's house. He was outside watering his plants. My mom called out to him in Malay, telling him these were our guests from overseas. You know what he did? He immediately went inside and came back out with a bag of rambutans from his tree. He handed them to Chris and said, "Welcome to Malaysia. These are from my garden." Chris was confused. "But we've never met. Why is he giving me fruit?" I explained, "Because you're in the neighborhood now." And in his mind, that means you're part of the community. Even if it's just for 3 days. We walked further, and Auntie Lim saw us from her gate. She waved us over. Within 5 minutes, she was bringing out homemade kui and insisting we try it. She asked them about their countries, their families, what they thought of Malaysia so far. And then she said something that made Jake stop chewing. She said, "You must come back and visit us again. Promise me. Because now we know you, and we will worry if we never see you again." Jake put down the kui. He looked at me and said, "She's serious, isn't she? She actually cares." "Of course she cares," I told him. "You've been introduced? That means something here." But the real moment came when we stopped at the morning market. My mom wanted to show them where she shops for vegetables and fresh ingredients. The vendors all knew her. And when she introduced my friends, something beautiful happened. One vendor, an elderly Chinese uncle who sells vegetables, immediately started giving them discounts. "For your foreign friends," he said to my mom in Malay. "First time in Malaysia, must feel welcome." Another vendor, a Malay lady selling fried snacks, gave them free samples and insisted they take extra. "No charge for guests," she said. Emma was overwhelmed. She told me, "These people don't know us. They're running businesses. Why are they giving us free food and discounts?" And this is where I explained something fundamental about Malaysian culture that foreigners struggle to understand. In Malaysia, there's this concept that when someone is a guest in your community, the entire community shares the responsibility of making them feel welcomed. It's not transactional. It's not about money. It's about dignity and honor. The vendors weren't losing business by being generous. In their minds, they were upholding something bigger than profit. They were representing Malaysia to foreigners. And that representation mattered more than a few ringgit. We spent 3 hours at that market. And by the end, Jake, Emma, and Chris had been adopted by about 15 different vendors who now knew their names and were making jokes with them. On the walk back home, Chris was quiet. I asked him what he was thinking. He said, "I'm thinking about how different this is from everywhere else I've traveled. In most places, tourists are seen as walking wallets. Here, I feel like people actually want me to have a good experience, not because I'm paying them, but just because." That evening, my mom asked them what they wanted for dinner. They said they didn't want her to cook again because she'd done so much already. She laughed and said, "Not cooking for guests? Impossible. But I have an idea." She called my aunt, my uncle, and 2 of our family friends. Within an hour, our house was filled with people. Everyone brought food. Everyone wanted to meet the foreign guests. And what started as a simple dinner turned into a full-blown gathering with 15 people in our living room. My uncle brought his guitar. We sang songs. People told stories. My aunt taught Emma how to wrap a hijab properly because Emma had asked about it earlier in the day. My cousin taught Jake and Chris some Malay phrases, and everyone laughed at their pronunciation. Around 10 p.m., as people were starting to leave, Jake pulled me aside. His voice was shaking. He said, "I need you to understand something. I come from a culture where people barely know their next-door neighbors. Where community doesn't really exist anymore. And tonight, I sat in a room with people I met 4 hours ago, and it felt like family. Like real family. I don't know how to process this." I told him, "This is normal here. This is just what we do." He shook his head. "No. It's not normal. It's extraordinary. And most of the world has lost this. But you still have it here." That night, after everyone left, Emma came downstairs. She couldn't sleep. We sat in the living room, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, "I think I understand now why people cry when they leave Malaysia. It's not about the food or the beaches or the buildings. It's about this feeling. The feeling that you matter to people even when you're a stranger. I've been traveling for 10 years, and I've never felt this before." But it was day 3 that broke them completely. Because on day 3, we did something that revealed the deepest truth about Malaysian hospitality. And when it happened, Chris couldn't hold back his tears anymore. On their last morning, my mom woke up early again. But this time, she wasn't just cooking breakfast. She was preparing care packages. She had stayed up late the night before, cooking and packing food in containers. She made rendang, sambal, kui, everything they'd loved over the past 3 days. When they came downstairs with their bags, ready to head to the airport, they saw the containers lined up on the dining table. My mom had labeled each one with their names. She'd wrapped them carefully so they could take them on the plane. "For your journey," she said. "So you don't forget the taste of home." Emma started crying right there. She hugged my mom and said, "How can I thank you for everything you've done?" My mom wiped Emma's tears and said, "You don't thank family. You just come back and visit again." But that wasn't even the moment that broke Chris. That came when my grandmother appeared from the kitchen. She was holding 3 small gift bags. Inside each one was a traditional Malaysian batik scarf. She'd bought them the day before without telling anyone. She gave one to each of them and spoke in Malay. I translated, "She says she wants you to have something to remember us by. And whenever you look at it, remember that you have a grandmother in Malaysia who will pray for you." Chris just lost it. He sat down on the couch, holding that scarf, and started sobbing. Jake and Emma were crying too. The whole room was emotional. Chris finally composed himself enough to speak. He said, "I'm sorry. My own grandmother stopped talking to me 3 years ago because I chose a career she didn't approve of. And here's this woman who met me 3 days ago, giving me a gift and saying she'll pray for me. I don't deserve this kindness." My grandmother didn't understand his English, but she sat next to him and held his hand. And even though they couldn't communicate with words, the message was clear. In that moment, he wasn't a stranger from Australia. He was her grandson. The drive to the airport was quiet. Everyone was processing their emotions. When we got there, we stood outside the departure hall, and none of them wanted to go in. Jake said, "I feel like I'm leaving family. This is harder than I expected." I told them what my mom had told me to say. The door is always open. Whenever you come back to Malaysia, you have a home here. Not a hotel. A home. They went through the gates, waving until we couldn't see each other anymore. I got back in the car and saw that my mom had been crying too. I asked her why, and she said, "Because they were good kids. And it's hard to say goodbye to good kids." 3 days after they landed back in their countries, I received a video call. All 3 of them were on it together. They'd been talking about their experience non-stop. Jake said he'd told his parents everything, and they couldn't believe it. Emma said she'd been researching Malaysian culture obsessively because she needed to understand how an entire society could be built on such genuine warmth. Chris said he'd already started looking at flights to come back. But then Emma said something that hit me hard. She said, "I realized something. Everything we've been taught about success and happiness in the West is about accumulation. Accumulating money, experiences, things. But what you showed us is about connection. And I think that's why we all felt so emotional. Because for 3 days, we experienced what it's like to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And now we're back in our regular lives, and it feels empty by comparison." Jake added, "I've been thinking about how your mom treated us. She didn't know us. She didn't owe us anything. But she gave us everything. And she didn't do it for recognition, or reward. She did it because that's who she is. That's who your culture raised her to be. And I can't stop thinking about how rare that is in the world today. Since that trip, we've had hundreds of conversations about what happened. And I want to share with you what I've learned about Malaysian hospitality, because it's not what most people think. Malaysian hospitality isn't about being polite. Politeness is surface level. It's about manners and etiquette. What we practice here goes deeper. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person who crosses your path. It's about understanding that when someone enters your space, they become your responsibility, not as a burden, but as an honor. My mom didn't cook for 3 days straight because she had to. She did it because in her worldview, feeding people is an act of love. And love isn't something you ration or calculate. You give it freely, abundantly, without expecting anything in return. The vendors at the market didn't give discounts because of profit strategy. They did it because they understood that those 3 foreigners would go back to their countries and tell people about Malaysia. And what they'd remember wouldn't be the prices or the products. They'd remember the feeling of being valued. My grandmother didn't give those scarves because of obligation. She did it because in 3 days, she'd formed a genuine bond with 3 strangers, and she wanted them to carry a piece of her with them. This is what foreigners don't understand about Malaysia until they experience it. Our hospitality isn't performative. It's not for social media or reputation. It's woven into how we see the world and our place in it. We're taught from childhood that guests are blessings. That when someone trusts you enough to enter your home, you honor that trust with everything you have. That communities are built on interdependence, not independence. That your dignity is tied to how you treat others, especially those who can't repay you. In a world that's becoming more isolated, more transactional, more focused on individual success, Malaysia has held on to something ancient and precious. The understanding that we're all connected. That strangers are just family we haven't met yet. That abundance isn't about having more than others, but about sharing what you have. Jake, Emma, and Chris have all come back to Malaysia since that first trip. And each time, it's the same thing. My mom cooks too much. My grandmother gives gifts. The neighbors welcome them back like long-lost relatives. Because that's exactly what they are now. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't unique to my family. This is Malaysia. From Perlis to Johor, from Sabak to Sarawak, you'll find this same spirit. Malay families, Chinese families, Indian families, indigenous communities, everyone practicing their own versions of this ancient art of making strangers feel like family. And in a world that's forgetting how to connect, that's becoming increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. The reason my friends cried wasn't because we did something extraordinary. It was because we did something that should be ordinary but has become extraordinary. We treated them like human beings worthy of love and care, not because they earned it or paid for it, but simply because they existed and crossed our path. That's Malaysian hospitality. That's what moved them to tears. And that's what they'll carry with them for the rest of their lives. If you've experienced this kind of welcome in Malaysia or anywhere else in the world, share your story in the comments. Because these stories matter. They remind us what we're capable of when we choose connection over transaction, abundance over scarcity, and love over indifference. And if you've never experienced it, I have one message for you: come to Malaysia. Not as a tourist. Come as someone willing to be welcomed into our homes, our neighborhoods, our lives. Because we're waiting to show you what family really means. Thank you for watching. And remember, somewhere in Malaysia, there's a grandmother praying for 3 foreigners she met for 3 days. Because that's just what we do here.